The Lost Kingdom. The Prince and His Pride. In the heart of a kingdom that gleamed with gold and marble, where banners fluttered across towers and the streets echoed with the steps of soldiers and merchants alike, lived a prince named Kael. Young, striking, and talented in swordsmanship, diplomacy, and strategy, Kael had been raised to believe that the world was his to command. From the moment he could walk, he had been told he was destined for greatness, and greatness, he believed, meant no one could teach him anything. The palace was a marvel of architecture, with sprawling gardens, fountains that sparkled under the sun, and chambers lined with tapestries, depicting the glory of generations past. Servants bowed, advisors waited for his commands, and even the neighboring nobles treated him with a mixture of awe and fear. Yet none of it satisfied Kael. Why waste time listening? He often muttered to himself, I already know what must be done. His arrogance showed in every decision. He dismissed the advice of experienced generals, believing his strategies flawless. He ignored warnings from merchants about dwindling supplies and overconfidently challenged neighboring kingdoms, convinced his army could win any battle without careful planning. The kingdom flourished outwardly, but cracks began to show beneath the polished surface. Trade routes were strained. Villagers whispered about rising taxes and empty granaries, and the council of advisors exchanged uneasy glances when Kael's pride led to reckless displays of power. Yet the prince, blinded by his own certainty, noticed none of it. It was during the Festival of Crowns, a celebration of the kingdom's prosperity, that the first real warning arrived. A scout returned from the northern border, face pale and voice trembling. My prince, he said, bowing deeply, our scouts report unusual movements. A coalition of rival lords is gathering forces beyond the frosted hills. They speak of conquest, and they are not waiting. Kael laughed, dismissing the scout's fear. Let them come. Our walls are strong, our soldiers skilled. I have trained for this. I need no counsel's advice. Prepare the army. Victory will be swift. His advisors murmured their concern, but Kael silenced them with a wave. Pride had made him deaf to caution. His confidence was intoxicating, so much that even those closest to him could not convince him to pause and listen. That night, Kael wandered the palace gardens alone, looking out at the horizon. The northern hills seemed distant and quiet, but a shadow of unease lingered in the corners of his mind. He shrugged it off. What could go wrong? He whispered to himself, though a tiny voice deep within questioned his certainty. Unbeknownst to him, the kingdom's fate was already beginning to shift. A series of events, small at first, would soon challenge everything Kael believed about power, control, and leadership. His arrogance would be tested. And only by learning the truth about humility could he hope to save the kingdom he thought was invincible. The first spark of the coming storm had arrived, though Kael could not yet see it. The first battle came sooner than Kael expected. The coalition of rival lords descended from the frosted hills like a storm, their banners dark against the horizon. Kael led his army confidently, his armor polished, his sword shining, certain that victory would be easy. But the battle was not as he imagined. Ambushes struck from hidden passes, supplies ran low, and the soldiers, though skilled, were exhausted from Kael's overconfident strategies. By nightfall, his army had suffered losses far beyond what he had anticipated. Pride, Kael realized too late, had blinded him. The palace, once a place of security, now felt fragile. Advisors whispered about retreat and negotiation, but Kael's heart burned with shame. He could not accept that his arrogance had endangered everyone. Yet he could not find the solution alone. It was then that an old mentor appeared, Sir Alaric, a knight who had trained Kael since childhood. Alaric was no stranger to loss or the burden of leadership. He looked at Kael not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. "You are skilled, Kael," Alaric said softly. "But skill without humility is a sword without a hand to guide it. Leadership is not about proving yourself. It is about listening, understanding, and making choices that protect those who depend on you." Kael struggled to hear the words. Pride hissed at him, telling him he already knew enough. Yet, seeing the fear in the eyes of his soldiers, the uncertainty in his counsel, and the worry of the common people, he knew Alaric spoke the truth. Over the next days, Kael embarked on a journey that was far more difficult than any battlefield. He visited the villages along the kingdom's borders, listening to farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants. He walked the crowded markets, learning the struggles of those he had once ignored. For the first time, Kael saw his kingdom not as a map of borders and armies, but as a living network of people whose lives depended on wisdom, care, and understanding. He trained differently too, not for glory but for preparation, learning from advisors rather than dismissing them. He strategized with generals, considering the advice of those who had spent decades studying the terrain and the enemy. And in moments of doubt, he asked questions instead of giving orders, learning that humility did not weaken him, it strengthened him. Yet the true test came when scouts reported a critical supply caravan trapped beyond the enemy lines. Kael had once charged recklessly into such dangers. This time, he paused. He listened to Alaric, consulted his generals, and even spoke to the villagers whose food and safety depended on the mission. Together, they devised a careful plan, relying on teamwork and foresight rather than bravado. Kael felt something unfamiliar, a quiet patience. The satisfaction of making the right choice, rather than the fastest or boldest one. By nightfall, the caravan returned safely, bringing relief and hope to the kingdom. The soldiers, villagers, and advisors saw a different prince, one who had faced his pride and begun to lead not with arrogance, but with wisdom. Kael, standing atop the palace balcony that evening, looked out at the kingdom he had once thought invincible. It was still fragile, still threatened, but now, he saw clearly that true strength lay not in power alone, but in the humility to learn, listen, and grow. And in that moment, Kael realized that the journey of humility had only just begun. The day of the final battle arrived, and the northern army advanced like a shadow across the plains. Kael stood on the palace balcony, the wind tugging at his cloak. He no longer felt the arrogance that once made him fearless. He felt responsibility. Every choice now carried the weight of lives, of families, and of a kingdom that depended on him. Beside him stood Sir Alaric. "Remember, Kael," the mentor said quietly. "Lead with humility. Listen, trust, and act wisely. Pride brought danger. Wisdom will bring victory." Kael nodded. He had learned that courage alone was not enough. Success required understanding, empathy, and the willingness to rely on others. When the first wave of the enemy reached the borders, Kael's strategy unfolded. He had gathered his generals and villagers alike, coordinating defenses not by command alone, but by listening to each person's strengths. Scouts led him to weak points, blacksmiths fortified walls with insight, and soldiers moved with confidence because they were trusted, not ordered blindly. During the battle, Kael remained among his people, not above them. He helped reinforce barricades, reassured frightened villagers, and personally guided soldiers to safer positions. His humility inspired loyalty. His willingness to learn earned respect. Where once his pride had led men into danger, now his wisdom protected them. The enemy, confident in their own might, underestimated the united front of a kingdom led not by arrogance, but by a leader who listened. Traps and clever maneuvers, devised in collaboration with his generals, slowed the invaders. Kael's understanding of the terrain, combined with his careful planning, allowed the defenders to outmaneuver their foes. Slowly, the tide turned. By dusk, the northern army was retreating. The banners of Kael's kingdom flew high, not merely as a symbol of victory, but as a testament to the power of humility and wisdom. The streets filled with cheering citizens, soldiers, and neighbors alike. The prince had saved not only his people, but the very spirit of the kingdom. After the battle, Kael walked through the city, greeting soldiers, merchants, and villagers. He no longer carried himself with arrogance. Instead, he listened, asked questions, and acknowledged the contributions of everyone around him. Even the smallest acts, he realized, had shaped the outcome of the war. Later in the Grand Hall, Alaric approached him. "You have learned what few ever do," the mentor said, placing a hand on Kael's shoulder. "Leadership is not about pride or power. It is about humility, empathy, and understanding. Your kingdom survives because you finally saw beyond yourself." Kael looked around at the faces of his people, at the rebuilding and the hope in their eyes. He understood the truth of Alaric's words. Pride could blind. Humility could illuminate the path forward. A leader was not someone who simply commanded. It was someone who served, listened, and learned. From that day on, Kael ruled not as a prince who sought to prove himself, but as a king who inspired, protected, and nurtured. The kingdom thrived, its people united not by fear, but by respect and trust. And Kael carried the lesson with him forever. True strength lies not in arrogance, but in humility. Pride may lead to downfall, but wisdom and empathy can save worlds.